Noticias Telemundo con Julio Vaqueiro, edición especial.
Ya van 11 días desde la muerte de George Floyd y como los anteriores, ha sido un día de protestas.
Everybody's too afraid to have this conversation about racism. But when are we going to be ready? The time is now.
No more silence.
George Floyd and Breonna Taylor are victims of our system. For decades, we have heard countless reports of Black people being killed because of racism and ignorance. The police who killed Breonna Taylor were not charged for her murder and remain free as I speak to you in this video. There needs to be a change. There has to be a solution. What can we as global citizens do? Let's first address something that thrives within our Latinx community, something we all became victims of and then abusers of in its teachings.
We do have something that's called colorism that impacts the way we perceive each other, whether it's Latinx or Latinos with other Latinos or Latinos with the Black community.
Vivian Messner is the assistant professor at Virginia Commonwealth University's Robertson School. She is of Colombian descent and an expert in mass media and culture.
Colorism is people experience racism based on their color of their skin.
In Latin America, like in the US, but it's more prominent in Latin America, we have something called a pigmentocracy. And it's literally a hierarchy based on pigment. The darker you are, you're more associated with poverty and low levels of education.
So the closer you are to Blackness, people see it as malo.
So how did colorism begin in the Latinx community?
The start of colorism we recognize in Latin America today likely began when the Spanish brought a European caste system to the Americas. Illustrations from Mexico in the 1700s depict classifications for individuals based on their gender, race, skin color, or place of birth. These hierarchies set the groundwork for associating whiteness with power and desirability.
The lighter you are in Latin America, the more privilege you have, which means more access to jobs, schools, education.
Our ancestors, our relatives have been taught that to be lighter skinned means survival, means a better life.
The teachings of Mejorar la Raza and Blanqueamiento are huge issues within our community. We were all taught in some way that lightness and whiteness is a positive experience and that being dark and having darker skin is a bad experience, which influences who we decide to surround ourselves with, date, and marry in our lives. At their core, these are white supremacist teachings.
They just didn't know better, and to them, that was like a ticket out. It was also like, I don't want you to endure what I had to endure. They didn't have the language, right? They didn't have the privilege to unpack all of the hate that was brought up upon them, and that's why it's our duty.
It's our duty to raise awareness. We have the privilege to educate ourselves about the stereotypes we have been fed about our community. Mass media plays a huge role in this.
And when we look at the Spanish media, we see in the programming, whether it's movies, whether it's novelas, soap operas, you see that most of the characters tend to be lighter skinned. They tend to be white.
We internalize what we see without even knowing it. If all we see is white faces in these powerful spaces, that's all we'll think success and beauty is. We need to recognize how big of a problem this is. This media brainwashing leads to prominent anti-Blackness to continue to spread within our community. Not being represented in the media impacts a child for the rest of their lives.
It does traumatize you. I was afraid to even say anything about being Hispanic to anyone. My skin color was going to lead to that question of like, no, you're not. My skin color doesn't mean I'm not Hispanic. I was raised in the same home. I was raised with the same food. I was raised around the same language. That doesn't make me any less Hispanic.
And growing up with a visibly Black Afro-Latinx sibling, I've seen the way that anti-Blackness has manifested. My sister coming home like crying because she doesn't look like me and my mom, and people are telling her, you're adopted, you're not Latinx, you're lying. Just seeing the way that's manifested and affected like my sister, who is much darker than me, and my brother too, their existence literally being denied, and seeing the harm that has caused in their lives and their identity is something that we all really need to be aware of.
My parents are Colombian, so I have a Colombian heritage. I can say that I necessarily did not grow up learning so much about all the contributions that Hispanics did or have done, and the same thing with the Black community. So I think that's one point that we can all improve. We improve the race relations, to think about the contributions that Black Americans have done and the Latinx community as well.
We owe a lot to the African American community, a lot to Black politics. If you wanted your kids to go to a certain school, better schools with white folks, if you got a job at a certain industry, especially with the government, you managed to get into certain spaces, it was because of the African American community. When Black people are okay, then it actually trickles down or trickles sideways to other communities.
The Black community opened doors and continue to open doors for us Latinos. So it's important that rather than thinking that we are in competition as minorities, I think that it is in our benefit to work together, to think about us as a community together being the fabric of our neighborhoods, our communities, the nation. In many Latinx, Latino communities, they kind of want to hide those African roots. Those African roots are very prevalent in history, but also in music, in culture. You can't really hide that contribution of all the African heritage that the Latinx community has. According to the Pew Research Center, about 25% of Latinos here in the United States identify as Afro-Latinos. One of my favorite Afro-Latinos was Celia Cruz, La Reina de la Salsa. I think it's important that as a community that we recognize Afro-Latinos, the contributions, our history, and that influence, because that just makes us stronger. As Latinx community, as Hispanics, I think we all know that, we always have like a cousin who says something inappropriate, or a tío, an uncle. So I think it's important we help them expand their knowledge and understanding of the Black community, of the Afro-Latinos, and, rather than staying silent.
If you can't speak up about things, if you can't educate people, then people are going to stay ignorant. And ignorance is our worst enemy. Even if they don't agree with you, the fact that they know this information now or know how someone feels is important.
We have to listen and validate rather than invalidating and acting like they're crazy, because they are not. These are real experiences. Then we have to check our part in this system.
First, by advocating for Black lives, you have to advocate for the Black people around you, in your communities, your neighbors, your friends.
It's time to listen, it's time to learn, and it's time to dismantle the kinds of violence, thinking, and behavior that has existed for centuries within our community.
It's a Latino fight as well. You know why? Because we have Afro-Latinos, we have Black Latinos, and the community of Latinos seem to always forget that in multiple countries across the world, there are Black Latinos, no matter you're Mexican, Colombian, South America, Central American, no matter what, and they seem to forget that because of race and color, and we can't forget that. This is why it's our fight too, because these are our brothers and sisters.
At the end of the day, we all have a voice and we all have a choice. Todos tenemos una decisión y una voz. You can be the best you, the real you.
Recognizing that Black lives matter, we should be interested in improving health conditions, improving education, improving access for our communities. So the more we work together, the more we support each other, I think we can create a lot of great things.